12, your daily podcast on the Big 12 Conference, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody. Josh Neighbors here from the Locked On Big 12 podcast. Joining us tonight for the first time, it is Austin Keeney of Wide Right and Natty Light. That is the SB Nation site for the Iowa State Cyclones. And for my money, pound for pound, Austin, the maybe the best SB Nation site name. There's a lot of good ones, but I think that one's pound for pound, maybe the best.
I mean, I can't disagree with you. It's got to be one of our top selling points. Although, if it's okay to say this, I much prefer the Busch Light to the Natty Light, but I still have to live up to the site name.
So I'll tell you, I am based in Virginia, but I attended the University of Missouri. So I am in Busch Light country. At least I was, I went to school in Busch Light country. And I'll tell you this, I feel like there's, Busch Light has its own place. And I'd say that, would you say Iowa State tailgates are more populated by Natty Light or Busch Light? What would you say?
Oh, it's definitely Busch Light. I think Busch Light is like the state drink of Iowa, especially on a Saturday. I
would say Anheuser-Busch for Missouri, but I feel like you see a lot of Natty Lights. So it might be actually flipped for Mizzou. Huge game this week for Iowa State, obviously playing Iowa. We're going to get into that. But obviously the big news everybody is talking about is that it appears tomorrow the Big 12 is basically going to formally agree to accept 4 new schools: BYU, Houston, Cincinnati, and UCF. And Austin, there's been so much talk about this. And I feel like there's a lot of people who are almost missing the point. There have been a lot of talking heads that have been saying, well, how big of a move really is this? How great of a financial impact is there adding these 4 teams? But to me, that's missing the point. If you're looking for that, because for us in Big 12 country, the big news here, the conference is going to survive. No matter what other people think of it, the conference is going to survive. And I think for us, once again, Big 12 country, that's the headline. That's the storyline here. And that's the most important part of this.
100%. I mean, there was a lot of talk about how like the Big 12 would have to merge with the American. And I think a lot of people were missing the point where the Big 12 is still in a position where they could take the top schools from the American and effectively push that conference to the side and make a clear divide from the top 5 to the rest of the conferences out there.
Yeah, they could make that, I think people are worried about it, but there you go. I think this and once basketball season rolls around, I think people, the opinions are going to change, but this conference in terms of basketball is going to be one of the best. And I also think in football, Andy Staples wrote about this in The Athletic, but this move makes the Big 12 conference more competitive from a postseason standpoint, right? These are all schools, at least recently, with some postseason success, some credentials. Obviously, BYU's got a great program. They're getting added because they're a strong program, but also, too, they've got that national recognition. Houston's a school, obviously, in a major, one of the biggest media markets, and whether how much that impacts it's to be seen. UCF is an upward trending program that I'm not sure how you feel. I think they have a chance. They actually in Cincinnati, depending on how long they end up keeping Luke Fickell as a coach, they have a chance to be like 2 of the best teams in actually what will end up being the new Big 12 conference.
Yeah, I mean that's the point. If we're not in a position where we're just going to grab whoever can bring us the most money. I mean that's what we should be doing, is trying to maximize whatever comes to the next TV contract, because apparently that's all that matters. But winning is what's going to make teams more popular. So yeah, it absolutely makes sense to strike while Cincinnati's on their upswing. I mean, UCF just hired Gus Malzahn. They've had staying power, national champions. So that's one in the feather of the cap for the Big 12. BYU just had a great year. They've got a national fan base. They have their own television deal and everything. So Houston's in a giant market, but they've had a recent run of success too, and they have some history to fall back on. So it made all the sense in the world to add these schools, and it's going to make the conference a lot of fun. It'll be really interesting to see who emerges as like that alpha dog, because we've really settled into the place where Oklahoma and Iowa State, shameless plug, we're working our way up there, but there's a pretty clear divide from the top of the Big 12 to the bottom. And this league is going to be extremely balanced. I'll be extremely interested in who will like eventually rise to the top. And honestly, I think Iowa State might have a chance to do it as long as our coaching staff stays in place.
Right. And I've always said this about the Big 12. I think what makes the conference so exciting is the fact that you look at the last 10 years and how many different schools have made that push to be that second team. I know, like you said, Oklahoma has been at the top, but think about the runs from Baylor, from Iowa State, from Kansas State, from TCU, from Oklahoma State, from Texas. Like there has been, and I know Texas is leaving, but the whole point of this is saying that there has always been space for another team kind of push and things kind of go, they're cyclical. They go kind of in waves about who is the team that makes that next push. I do agree. Iowa State, they keep that coaching staff, has a bit more of a chance. I would say Oklahoma State too. That I think that power vacuum left by Oklahoma, who has been a thorn in their side every single time it seems like Oklahoma State might take that next step. They kind of get knocked down a peg. But I wanted to ask you about conference organization. How do you think they should split this up? Do you think it should be an East and West type situation? Do you think they should kind of go, Cincinnati, West Virginia, UCF, Iowa State? Maybe you take the two Kansases and then you do the rest of the schools and BYU. How would you break up this conference if you were Bob Bowlesby and the conference presidents?
That's an excellent question. I haven't thought about it a ton, but I think what would make the most sense for Iowa State, or what maybe would put them in the best chance to succeed, is if we did like a north-south divide. Mm-hmm. If you think about where Iowa State has pulled some of their best players out of that Ohio, Michigan area, if we get that annual game against Cincinnati, West Virginia is my favorite place in the Big 12 to travel for a road game. The Kansas schools are accessible. That would probably be the easiest from a travel perspective. I don't know how they're going to do it, I guess, but I think north-south maybe makes the most sense. You probably preserve more rivalries that way too. You make sure the Kansas schools keep playing each other, and whatever a rivalry may be in a conference just kind of thrown together out of convenience. But, Baylor and Texas Tech, TCU, Houston, they can all do their Texas thing down there in a hypothetical South.
I would assume the Texas schools are going to be kept together because now you've got Baylor, Texas Tech, TCU, Houston, right? I don't think I'm missing anybody. There's just so many, out of the new Big 12. I think they're going to keep Cincinnati and West Virginia together because that makes the most sense, right? Those two need to be, because Cincinnati is being added because of their quality recently in football, but also because West Virginia desperately needs a partner. We've heard about the travel issues. I know Iowa State does have this too.
We've been like their partner, even though we're 900 miles apart.
Right. And that's the thing is, like, I do feel bad, and Bob Huggins has talked about it. I mean, definitely during basketball season, like those guys, they don't travel as much as an NBA team would, but I mean, you could put a month of an NBA team up against a month from West Virginia basketball, and I mean, they're taking some trips. They're having to go to Texas multiple times and having to go to Kansas, and that's not, as somebody who lives in Virginia proper, West Virginia is just not very accessible. So I'm glad, and I like them. I think it's a great program football wise, obviously quality basketball wise, and so I'm really glad they're giving them a partner. I like the north and south idea. I think that the ones that'll be preserved, they'll keep Texas's together, right? Everything Texas related. I think we're assuming that's going to stay together. But I do think the most important is keeping the Kansases, and then keeping obviously Cincinnati and West Virginia. As an Iowa State fan, thinking about maybe traveling, whatever, what is the most exciting thing to you when you consider the possibilities with these four new teams? What is the trip you're most looking forward to making with these new squads being added?
I can pretty comfortably say it's not going to be Provo. We'll probably start there.
Are you saying it's a bad cultural fit for the Iowa State fans?
I mean, honestly, I've heard the joke 1,000 times. Like, we need a documentary crew following BYU's first trip to West Virginia, first trip to Morgantown. Honestly, Cincinnati is probably, I mean, one, it's the closest school to where we are. But like I said, that's like really fertile recruiting territory. It's a historic stadium. It's different. They're going to be competitive. And it's a lot more accessible than, like, I don't know. It's hard to get on a flight to go to Houston, or, well, I guess that's a hub city, but, Houston for Iowa State fans, that doesn't bring a lot of juice. I mean, actually, Cincinnati's already trying to start that rivalry with Iowa State. We had a little uniform back and forth going on the internet this week. So yeah, I think Cincinnati would be my
What
first
about
choice.
Orlando? How do you feel about Orlando?
It's just so far away. If the game's in November, then yeah, I'm on board. But if it's like an early season conference game,
well, I could see a scenario where, like, you have one of those games in Orlando in November, and it's, 10, 15,000, 20,000 Iowa State fans, because I will say this, as somebody who's worked around the conference and covered, the Iowa State fans are notorious for traveling, right? You could argue that they're actually the best traveling group out of the entire Big 12 when it comes to, cross sports. The Big 12 tournament every single year, I know Iowa State stays in the tournament, have not been long as of late, but I remember that game last year that they played, and the crowd was absolutely packed with Iowa State fans, the game where things basically got shut down the day afterwards. And the team had been horrible that year, but they'd still showed up in full force. So I could see 10 to 15,000 Iowa State fans in Orlando in November, couldn't you?
Definitely. If you time it right, if it's like right around Thanksgiving, everyone's like, get me the heck out of Iowa. I'm going somewhere warm. Let's go to Orlando for a football game. So I go Cincinnati 1, although Orlando would probably be 2, Houston 3, and then Provo number 4.
All right, we'll go. So let's get on to this Iowa State-Iowa game. First, a word from our sponsors here. Today's show brought to you by RockAuto.com. RockAuto.com is the best place to find affordable parts for your car or truck. Austin, let me tell you something. Why would you spend 50, 70, 100% more for parts at a chain store or dealership? Just go to RockAuto.com. Take care of it. Family-run business, online, serving auto parts customers for 20 years. I'm sure you've heard the jingles. Rock Auto.
Yep.
So they're much better, on the commercials than me actually doing it. But go check them out. RockAuto.com. Let them know what we sent you. Put Locked On in their "How'd you hear about us" box. That way they know we sent you. Amazing selection, always low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. That's RockAuto.com. All right, Austin. This matchup has been nicknamed El Asico in the past. Not today. Not this week. It's not. This is game day. The game day crowd, I hope they're ready, because those people are going to be nice and liquored up at like 9 o'clock in the morning. It's going to be raucous. What's your excitement level just for the atmosphere around this game?
Oh, the atmosphere. This is like, last week was a really good appetizer to get a full Jack Trice Stadium and a tailgating experience, but this one's going to be next level. You talk about the quality of the game and honestly, the exposure for the program, having College game day there, I don't think we can understate how important that's going to be in this position where, the Big 12 was kind of fighting for survival. Well, here you go. Iowa State fans, we got to show out. We got to put a great crowd out there. You got to have like a sea of people, just especially because ESPN is going to be broadcasting the game as well. So Atmosphere is going to be like an 11 out of 10. I have no doubt about that.
I'm kind of wishing they could have switched this game with Michigan and Washington, right? I kind of want to see that fan base after
in
a full
prime
day
time.
of tailgate. Yeah, it's going to be nuts at 4:30. Like, there's no doubt about that. That's not. But I kind of want to see them under the lights at Jack Trice Stadium. From a, this I think you're totally right. From the whole having game day there, be able to. This as somebody went to school like Missouri, like, this is a moment that gets marketed down the line, right? People always refer to the time they had game day there when they played Oklahoma. It's something that's been talked about, for generations of people who go to Iowa State. This will be talked about. This is a huge selling point. The game itself, is this the most important game in Iowa State's program history? Because I think maybe you could argue last year's New Year's Six Bowl was. I know they played Oregon. But the fact they'd never been there before, right? The fact that it was an unknown territory and they'd earned their way into a New Year's Six Bowl, I think that might merit actual consideration. The fact they won the game too. But this game, I've been saying all offseason, I'm sure y'all have too, it's going to decide how the season goes. It's going to decide if Iowa State can have those aspirations of potentially making a college football playoff. And also, if they win this game, it's a massive confidence booster, because it's the monkey off the back of beating Iowa. It's a Matt Campbell monkey off the back of not beating Iowa. It's the decade plus they have not beaten Iowa at Jack Trice Stadium. They have not done it, I believe, since, 2011? They have not beaten Iowa at Jack Trice. Is this the biggest game in program history?
I would say it's the most hyped game in program history. it is obviously extremely important. I think any Iowa State fans that are trying to downplay the importance of the game, and especially Iowa fans that are trying to downplay the importance of it, they're kidding themselves.
Yeah.
But the only reason I would say it's maybe not the most important is because it's a non-conference game. So, like, if you think back to a year ago, Iowa State lost their non-conference game to Louisiana and still managed to make the Big 12 championship game and have like maybe a 1% chance of making the college football playoff if they won that game. So
Right.
I would say 100% this is the most hyped game in program history. It's obviously extremely important. I would maybe even go so far as to say it's like number 2 behind the Big 12 championship game last year. But yeah, it's up there. We can't understate how important it is.
And in terms of performances coming to the game, you could not have a different story about the two teams. I mean, Iowa, they couldn't play a better game they played last week. I mean, especially the beginning, they just absolutely lit Indiana on fire in the beginning of that game. And then Iowa State needed a late stop to seal a win against Northern Iowa. But I will say this, the Cyclones are notorious late starters.
Yeah, honestly, we won the game, and I think a lot of people were just happy to get out of there with a win.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that. And look, UNI's not a bad program. I will say this. So I like Matt Campbell's strategy of kind of trying to limit the amount of contact in the offseason. I'm a fan of that. Do you think any of that comes into play? I'm not sure if it's how much talked about amongst the fan base, but do you think any of that comes into play in the early part of the season for Iowa State at all, considering their slow starts the last 2 years?
Yeah, that's a good question. Like last year, we did that out of necessity and came out and lost the first game. But in the past, we've started slow against a UNI. You know, it took 3 overtimes to beat them in 2019, and that wasn't one of those off seasons of limiting contact. So I thought it would be a positive. I'm not at practice. I don't know the level of physicality actually thrown in there. I wish I had a better answer for why we always seem to get off to such a slow start. I'm not sure how much I would attribute that to like the practice and how physical things were. Obviously, it's impossible to simulate a football game and the level of physicality that goes into that. I mean, maybe we could have tried to get ourselves a little bit more, I don't know, hitting pads, but I would take a lot of last week as us really just trying to, like, honestly, grind out a win. Don't show anything. We'll run our vanilla stuff and try and get out with a win. I wish we wouldn't have done that. I wish we would have taken, like, obviously we didn't take UNI lightly. We knew how important it was to get off to a 1-0 start, but I wish we would have treated it a little bit more like maybe like we're treating this week. You know, you can save a couple tricks in your bag for when you need them against Iowa, but I would have liked to see a little bit more of I guess an open playbook and a little bit more on the table against UNI.
Who would you mostly attribute that performance last week to, if you just had to pick a couple factors and boil it down best you could?
Well, I'd say number 1, Charlie Kohler didn't play. That's our best offensive weapon. Breece Hall is going to be a little bit at liberty what the offensive line does. And that's probably point number 2. The offensive line just didn't play great. And Charlie Kohler is a great blocker too. He helps out with that. But so Charlie not playing, and really we didn't use the tight ends a lot in the passing offense. That should change a lot this week. It has to change this week. And the offensive line just has to play better.
Yeah, and that's kind of leads us into Iowa, right? This is a team that peak Iowa is known for moving dudes up front, right, on both sides. That's what they want to do. Is that your biggest concern this week, is offensive line play? Is that kind of where you're looking to battle in the trenches? Because, it's really funny. The stats that have been thrown around the last couple of weeks, especially last week, is I work for SiriusXM and I've heard all these numbers about teams that outrush their opponent typically win the game a lot of the time. And I know we're fascinated with passing offenses, but really this is still a game that's won between the tackles, it feels like. I mean, this just shows you offensive line play is the most important thing on any team. Doesn't matter how good your quarterback is, or running back is, if you can't block and you can't protect, you're going to win football games. So is that kind of your number one level of concern as we head into this game against Iowa?
100%. This game, especially in the Cyhawk game, it comes down to whichever offensive and defensive line is going to have the edge, because these teams they're kind of mirror images of each other. It's one thing I love about how Matt Campbell's built the program is honestly, it's a little bit in the mold of what Kirk Ferentz has done at Iowa. We're going to push you up front. We're going to run the ball. We're going to play ball control. We're going to, limit damage on defense. But especially when we play each other, you can get away with that when you're facing a defense that's more used to seeing these spread out offenses and is a little bit more streamlined to deal with that. Iowa is used to playing these types of games. So 100%, the offensive line has to be better. Iowa they always have dudes. I mean, I would say us handling their offensive line is going to be important too. I think our defense is going to play well, but especially we got to get push and we got to control the ball. I mean, that's how we won games at the end of last year. It's how we really dominated opponents at the end of last year, as we were just able to lean on them. And Breece Hall is going to get 5 yards every time he touches the ball until he breaks one off for 20 yards. So if we can't do that, it's going to be the same old story of the Cy-Hawk game that we've seen over and over, where it's going to be really low scoring, and whichever team makes less mistakes is going to win the game. And that's typically been Iowa, especially during the streak.
Yeah, it kind of brings me to the quarterback question here is so big, because Brock Purdy, to me, is this Iowa State team will go as far as he can take them. And part of that's the offensive line too. But I mean, we saw, them almost come back last year against Oklahoma, and his bad decision-making kept them from being able to do that. We saw them play close with Baylor until Brock Purdy went absolutely bonkers in the second half of that game. And that is where, he led them. And so to me, that's the big question mark. But when I think about this game, I do think for Iowa State rather, getting ahead early is imperative, because I want Spencer Petras throwing the football. I want Iowa on the back foot. This is not, Iowa's offense is not built to go punch for punch with a lot of teams. I don't think they go punch for punch with Iowa State. So I think Iowa State, it's all about creating that balance for them, because there's so much focus on Breece Hall. It's up to Brock Purdy and a lot of offensive players too, but to spread that ball around, get to Hutchinson, get to Kolar, like you mentioned, the tight ends they have. To me, it's kind of what it comes down to. I think Iowa State, if they got the chance to land the first punch or two punches, that's where I want them to be. I know limiting mistakes is important, and it just kind of, I don't know how to feel about this game for that reason, right? Part of me, kind of like you're saying, is thinking take care of the football. The other part of me is saying try to land those two early punches, because I want to see Petras try to sling it around down a score or two.
Yeah, Spencer Petras is our nemesis from CBS. Chris Hassel actually called his own quarterback a malfunctioning jugs machine last year. So I absolutely want us playing from ahead against Petras. That's the thing that I guess gives me the most confidence in this game, is I'm not worried about him doing a ton. And if we think about the Cy-Hawk game in 2019, Iowa State did land the first blow. They ran a trick play that got us a long touchdown, and then it came down to who made the most mistakes. We had a fumble going into the end zone that ended up coming back to hurt us, and then obviously the infamous punt that we try and not talk about if we can help it. So yes, absolutely, you always want to play from ahead, especially against Iowa, because that's a quarterback that you're not really afraid of, and he's breaking in a bunch of brand new wide receivers.
And last week he was 17 for 13 for 27. I know they didn't need him that much, but still, guy completed under 50% of his passes. Gonna get your pick here in 1 second. Two more ads. I want to let you guys know about Sweat Block. If you guys are like me during the summer, you're sweating all the time, and Sweat Block wipes is here to help you all with that. They've been tested on the Rachel Ray Show by firefighters. They've got over 13,000 reviews on Amazon. They've been a bestseller there for over 10 years, manufactured in the good old US of A. If someone you know or you love is dealing with this issue, check them out. Sweatblock, sweatblock.com, promo code locked on. That's LOCKEDON, locked on. You get 20% off, or you can find them at Amazon or CVS. Today's show is also brought to you by our friends at betonline.ag. Austin, do you have any good picks this week? Anything you're feeling good about in terms of spread?
I have picks. I don't know if I feel good about them. I will start with a hat tip, and this is a chance to shamelessly plug my podcast that had Chris Felica, the Bear from Game Day, was on there. Nice. Likes Washington this week against Michigan, getting a touchdown as an underdog. Big overreaction to Washington losing to Montana. Obviously, that never should have happened, but a team that you would think is going to be better in week 2, and Michigan trying to replace their best wide receiver. So Washington plus 7.
right now, you can go to betonline.ag, maybe sprinkle a little cash right there. They've got their $200,000 NFL Super Contest, got eliminator pools as well. Go there today, betonline.ag. Use the promo code Locked On. You'll get a sign-up bonus as well when you do it. BetOnline, they are your online sportsbook experts, which brings us to this game. Now, this game, Iowa and Iowa State has been subject to line fluctuation, but it's kind of been one-way traffic unless, Austin, you've seen something and I haven't. I believe the number is still right now as I'm trying to pull it up right now, it's still at 4.5. So it started at 2.5, got up to 4.5, and it stays there. The public is pushing Iowa State here, but here's a problem I have. I don't like anything in this game above a field goal because we know how low scoring and defensive this game can be. I'm leaning Iowa State right now. I'm a Big 12 guy. I actually just think generally, I think they come out and look a lot better, a lot sharper this week and do throw those early punches that we talked about, well-oiled machine type offense. But what do you make of this line fluctuation that we've seen so far?
It's surprising. I actually figured the public is going to be a lot more on Iowa as an overcorrection to what happened last week. So I don't know. I get it. The smarter play is probably to take Iowa in the points. Iowa State, when they win the Cy-Hawk game, it's typically close. You're never going to get me to say take Iowa in the Cy-Hawk game from a gambling perspective. One thing I can say with a lot of confidence is that this game is going to be extremely low scoring. I don't know how low they could set the under where I'd think I'd have to go the other way.
Yeah, I'm torn, to say the least. I might have to put a 2-team teaser, try to get that line down around 1.5, maybe get a 6-point teaser, you get that thing, almost get a 1.5 maybe in a situation like that. But what is your game prediction? Am I too early on this? Can I get it from you on a Thursday evening?
No, you can get it from me. That's fine. First off, and I forgot to mention this too, our outgoing conference friends down there in Austin, I think Arkansas is going to beat them this week. Little woo pig suey, little teaser for what's to come for them in the SEC. I wanted to make sure I threw that in there. I've thought a lot about this one. I'm nervous. This is my least favorite game every single year. I'm always on edge. I want to win it so bad. I think the team is going to come out ready to play. I'm going to go ahead and take Iowa State to win. I'm saying 17-10. Very low scoring, very physical ball game. Cyclones find a way to come out on top by a touchdown.
So are you telling me it's a game where net punting yards might be the big difference? I love games like that.
I hate punting, especially after the way the last game ended.
Just against go for. Are you like who is that coach? Whatever his name is, Kelly, the guy who goes for it every time on 4th down? That's kind of your philosophy.
I mean, I guess I don't know. Punt return, maybe just let the ball hit the ground. Get everybody away from it right away.
I'm with you. I had this thought the other day. Actually, it was last season, and it kind of came back up when I was watching the Nebraska-Illinois game. Why do we let these kids return the punts? How often does it work out where something good happens when a punt gets returned? I know you want somebody to stop it from going inside the 10. I get that, but it feels like bad things happen more often than not.
Yeah, you're almost guaranteed to get a penalty if you get a decent return anyway. So,
yes.
So when it comes to punting, and trust me, there's going to be a lot of punting. And I'm not sure where Iowa State fans land on the El Assico, if they like that name. I'll embrace it. I think it's fun. It differentiates the game because the game is always really assy. I mean, the last game was extremely close, and the final score was 18-17, and the game was settled with a punt. So that's just kind of how it tends to go.
Yeah, the over-under on this game is 46. So that kind of gives you an idea
of huge under. Hammer it.
It does feel like the most likely scenario. All right, Austin Keeney, plug your podcast, where people can find your work, your social medias. Let the folks know where they can find you. By the way, the Texas fans will have something to say about your prediction. They have something to say about everything that we say about them. So they will have some comments for you, I'm sure, about your prediction.
You know what? I can't wait. I hope they come after me, and I hope they have fun going 4-8 every single year and celebrating the wins over Vanderbilt while Alabama crushes them by 50. So, yeah, like you said off the top, I write for WideRightNattyLight.com. My podcast it's called The Lightcast. We had Chris Felica on this week from ESPN from College Game Day. Twitter at Austin_Keeney. And check out our work. We've had an incredible week of content. Like I said, we had Felica, we had Chris Hassel on our weekly YouTube show. We had Josh Pate from CBS on another podcast this week. So we've got all kinds of Sci-Hot content out there for you. Best SB Nation site out there. Best name for an SB Nation site out there. Check us out.
Austin Keeney, we appreciate your time, man. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.